All right, fuck it. We're live. That was the wrong intro because StreamYard's acting up. So welcome everybody to the very first Sunday evening CHIT show. We're featuring Dan Noodles Man, the Rolo Tomasi of Wargaming. And our very special guest this evening is Mr. Alan Dickerson, a.k.a. Stiglr. Alan, thanks for doing this with us. We really appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. Always glad to help out.
Now, we understand. Go ahead.
Yeah, before we start, I wanna talk to Charles Latora for a second. I want to show him something. Okay.
Is it your pictures
Charles.
of your toilet?
No. Charles, I just got this. All right?
I'll laugh if they go all over the place. They're totally going all over the place.
All right, and there's 2 levels of these, Charles.
I mean, it looks fancy.
It really, really speeds up your painting for detail. That's it.
Okay, cool. I'm delighted that you're getting the value out of whatever that is.
Shut up.
I took when I was in high school, we had to take an art. There was like an art requirement. Okay, you had to take like one, whatever it was, of art. I did not take that class. I took photography instead. So I literally have not had an art class of any kind since grade school, and it shows. If you see my crude art. Now, if you want me to draw like a floor plan or something, that's a little different because I took 4 years of mechanical drawing back in the days when you did that on paper, which is not the case anymore. Anyway, Alan, we have coming up from our good friends at GMT. It sounds like the very next thing that will end up in the shipping queue, maybe as early as next month, is indeed By Swords and Bayonets, the latest entry in the great battles of the American Civil War system. So give us a little bit of an intro to the product. What is this aimed at? What is it aiming to accomplish as the latest entry in the series?
Okay, well, thank you for that lead in. By Swords and Bayonets is being marketed as a GBACW, or Great Battles of the American Civil War series starter kit. For people who don't know much about GBACW, it's a very popular tactical Civil War game system, but it is admittedly very difficult. The rules are chewy. I think the series rules are somewhere in the neighborhood of 42 to 45 pages by now. And
it's a chunky boy.
Yeah, it's chunky. And then on top of that, each game has a battle book with specific rules or replacement rules for certain series rules that bring a unique flavor to each particular battle. So the rules overhead is pretty great. There are even certain sections of the rules that give people fits a lot of times, like the line of sight rules, the movement and facing rules.
What's so difficult about line of sight rules?
Any game system, in my experience, any game system that includes line of sight as a rules feature, that tends to be one of the most complicated things in a game system.
Yeah,
I've reliably found that to be the case.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, they can be really, really simple, but given the nature of what we're trying to accomplish with our rules, and also bearing in mind that we're talking about the 19th century and we're not talking about, modern day where we've got, computer optics and things like that. We have to replicate the fact that, you've got guys sitting on horses, with telescopes and looking out over the field and trying to spot something or figure out something or spot for artillery. So, you can't really give people the benefit of the doubt, basically. So they're difficult and they're pretty comprehensive. And in fact, I have to, get little tutorials from Bill Byrne, our rules czar, all the time on the basic line of sight rules, and then
Seriously?
and then also there are certain optional line of sight rules that you can use or not use at your own option and things like that. So yeah, it's all very, very chewy, all very fiddly, as some people charge it with being. So as a result, a lot of people are intimidated, and they think they would love to get into it, and
Yeah.
play Gettysburg at a tactical level or something like that. And then they start hearing the stories, and or they get the rule book and they start going through it, and they're like, oh man,
Yeah,
maybe
but
this.
what about using the simple GBH QRS3FV?
We will have to address that next time because that is in development.
Yes, right.
The simple great battles of history.
No,
We talked
simple
about
that exists. We're talking Great Battles of the American Civil War.
Right.
Simple
Oh,
Great
so-
Battles of the American Civil War is being worked on, however.
Yes.
But that's
yes,
not
it
what
is.
this product, just for clarity's sake,
No.
that's not what this product is.
Okay,
This is a
okay.
full, all stops out GBACW game. It just happens to be presented in a way that's friendlier for maybe a newcomer to the series, right?
Dude, I
Right.
think
And
it's the cheapest game up. It's like $38.
that's the P500 price, right?
What
It's
the hey?
$60 retail.
Which
So
is still not
yeah,
bad.
it's
Yeah.
pretty cheap. It's a quad game. You get 4 full games for $60. So yeah, we're not charging a lot, but the idea is, instead of approaching GBACW with, say, 3 days of Gettysburg, which gets you, depending on version, 3 or 4 or even 5 maps, and 2,000 counters, and it takes you a year or something with your buddies to play.
And just
Instead
to
of
set
doing
up.
that, right, which adds to the sense of just being overwhelmed by the system itself. Instead of doing that, we decided, no, we're going to take 4 small scale battles where each side has no more than a division with a little negative sign, cut down division, at times even as small as 1 brigade per side,
Wow.
and find battles that are small enough to where you can, one, say, play it in the long afternoon or a full day, use it as a teaching game where one player is experienced and the other player doesn't know anything, and you just use a smaller battle to get the new person involved. So the counter density is like, not including the markers, far less than 50, maybe about 20 to 30 total combat counters. Then of course you're gonna have markers and things like that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
put that on a half size map, so we're talking 22 by 17 tops, and use that smaller space, smaller footprint, smaller number of forces to enable you to get your feet wet without
Having to worry about the other 75 counters that you are commanding at that particular chit.
Well,
Which brings up a question I wanted to ask. What adjustments did you find, if any, had to be made to the GBACW command system to reflect the fact that the battles you're simulating are way smaller than many of the other battles that have been previously done?
Yes, good question. When I'm asked about the level of support of the entire system in Swords and Bayonets, I tell people about like 80 to 90% of the series rules are supported in by Swords and Bayonets. The 10% that's not was by necessity left off because of the small size of the battles. One of the most important concepts in the Great Battle series is the concept of needing to maintain a command structure from the core leader at the top of the pyramid all the way down to the brigadier, and then below the brigadier, the forces, the regiments under that brigadier. So, and then of course you have an overall commander for the large battles, and they factor at a more abstract level. But the corps commanders are really the most important leaders on the map. And there are a lot of rules that make it very, very clear that you want to have a unbroken chain of command as often as you can, from the corps commander to the 2 or 3 division commanders under him, and then under them the 2 to 4, maybe sometimes 5 brigades under them. And if that command chain is broken at any point by distance or other considerations, what happens is the potential for the number of times that you can activate in an hour-long turn is going to be reduced. So basically,
Alan,
yes.
I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but I think that people want to know the most important question that is available when Stiglr creates a game and then someone beats you over the head to do a solitaire. I mean, the solitaire suitability is really high. So was that any of your doing, sir?
No.
It's just chit pull, so it just naturally it feels pretty good to solitaire it.
Yes, the solitaire capability is built into the system itself. So, because you have a chit pull system where
so there's no bot, no.
No, there are no bots or anything like that. It's just that the chit pull system, because it randomizes the order in which the forces are going to activate during a turn, and that has nothing to do with knowing what's going on with your opponent. That makes it very solitaire friendly. There are a couple little things.
Are you a fan of chit pull, or was this?
Oh, I love chit pull.
You chit pull, okay, great.
Yeah.
So do I. Yeah.
Chit pull brings a lot to the table, even aside from increasing solitaire suitability, though, right? It can be used to model command and control limitations. It can be used to simulate changes in doctrine, like Ted Racer did with the Dark Valley, for example. So it's a powerful mechanic. Thank you, Eric Lee Smith, for bringing it to us.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's an excellent way to model a number of things, and of course, yes, it does make things more solitaire friendly. And as much as I usually decry solitaire, I of course make use of it myself. When you're doing testing or things like that, and sometimes I want to just play something and there's I don't have an arrangement and there's nobody around to play. And it's like, yeah, sure, I'll play it solitaire if it's possible. But
you heard it here first, folks. You heard it here first.
Yes. But but I'm no hypocrite, because I do think that games were designed to be played, with another person.
Yeah, I agree with
whether
you.
that person is sitting across the table or is, also on the vassal server with you or whatever. I just think that games are better unless they were designed specifically as a solo game. I think games are always better played.
Stiglr, I mean, just look at ancient games. They're all 2-player games.
Yep. Right.
So
Go and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's true.
All of those.
All that stuff.
I don't think they ever found a solitaire ancient game, because if they did, that would freak me out.
I'm not aware of anything. However, I know who you need to talk to. Professor Irving Finkel, somewhere in the UK. That's your guy. Dr. whatever he is, Irving Finkel is your guy. He's on. There's video of this guy on YouTube talking about the ancient board games that they played in Ur. So
that's cool.
It is actually cool.
Let me go back and wrap up that
yes, please.
last point, and that is Because of the small nature of the battle, there are no corps commanders in any of the battles and by swords and bayonets. So a division commander, if that, will be the highest ranking commander on the map. And the series rules dictate that when the corps commander isn't on the map, either because he's a reinforcement or just wasn't, there at the time, or is somewhere away across the other side of the map, then the forces under him get docked an activation per turn because of that. So that's not in place. We basically confer that top ranking on the division commander and or some other mechanic to to allow um, a side to play without their corps commander. So but that's an important thing for a new player to understand, that it's important to maintain that chain of command all the way from the corps down to the brigade. So we in the battle book we make numerous mentions of the fact that, okay, yeah, we know there's no corps commander here, and the ranking commander is this guy, so but we're not going to dock you command points for that,
Makes
just for the
sense.
purposes of that, right?
And I think that may have been Berg's rationale for not including any smaller scenarios in the 3 versions of 3 Days of Gettysburg that we've seen thus far, right? Well, I don't know. I've only got the 3rd one, but there's really no small scenarios in there. There's there's a day 1, a day 2, a day 3, and a campaign, I think.
Yeah.
And it may be because of that scaling factor of the scenarios, that when you start to zoom down into specific actions where you're only necessarily dealing with, say, 6 or 12 counters at a time per chit, that would feel very strange without making some significant adjustments, I think, to the way the series rules get implemented in, say, Three Dog, right?
Right. Well, I will tell you that Dick Whitaker, who is taking over for Richard Berg as the series poobah, he is working hard on 3 Days of Gettysburg Deluxe. And in addition to adding an entirely new map to cover the cavalry fields east of Gettysburg,
Mm-hmm.
he is really, really going to town on adding more scenarios, because one of the quibbles that people could point at with 3 Days of Gettysburg were, as Artie mentioned, the dearth of scenarios where, if you're a fan of Gettysburg, you know that there are any number
Mm-hmm.
of parts of that battle that you could just kind of, put a spotlight on and forget about the rest of it for a while, and you know have a lot of fun with just Culp's Hill,
Mm-hmm.
just Little Round Top, just Pickett's Charge, just Buford versus Heath,
Mm-hmm.
all of those. So Dick has been working diligently on that, and not only is he um, making more of these scenarios to kind of fill in the narrative a little more, he's also reusing an idea that he brought out in Into the Woods, the Shiloh game, and there will be some small maps, even smaller than By Swords and Bayonets, that they can put really, really small micro engagements on, and those are going to be in the box as well. So
Alan, are you obviously you're designing other games, because once you're a designer, you're a designer. Is this your first published game? And if so, are you waiting to see how sales go, if that matters, to publish your next one?
okay, I'll take that question in parts. One, yes, this is my first published game, so I'm a newly minted designer now, and as I say, I I kind of put an asterisk on designer because basically, the Great Battles in the American Civil War system, as designed by Richard Berg and developed over the years by a number of people, um, that's like the shoulders of giants that I'm standing on. So really,
Right.
all I had to do was to, in effect, develop the 4 battles. I saying design is kind of like, I didn't come up with any of the mechanics that are underpinning the system. I'm just using them. And so all I really had to design were the maps, researching the order of battles, setting up the scenario, and trying to figure out how to make a game of it, how to apply victory conditions, writing special rules. And that's the thing I really, really enjoy is, adding the chrome to it and, adding a little flavor. And By Swords and Bayonets has a couple of really, really interesting special rules in 2 of the battles that I'm really, really curious to see what people will think of them. So, I'm kind of putting myself out there, and hopefully I won't get slammed too badly for them, but we'll see how they are received.
I'm going to break John Stanley's question up into 2 parts. One, and they're both going to be about cavalry. One is there a significant cavalry component in any of the battles in By Swords and Bayonet?
No, there is not. I think cavalry appear in 2 of them, and they have really, really small bit parts, and the cavalry forces are themselves
Mhm.
very, very tiny. One of the battles is Big Bethel, and the Confederates have a small contingent of cavalry that they can use, but historically in the battle, they were held in reserve and were only used to just basically rout the Union off the field after the battle had been decided. So we included them in the game. We stuck them, kind of back in the woods in the back of the battlefield. And victory point wise, they're very expensive for the Confederates to lose. So, you can use them because they were available, but if you just send them out willy nilly and get them shot up, then you're going to pay for it in terms of victory points. So that was the way we handled that.
Mm-hmm. And then, in terms of the other part of John's question here, are you thinking of at least a follow up?
Right now, no, I'm not thinking of a follow up. I don't know if there's anything in the works that is cavalry specific. I do know of a fellow who has an interest in doing something like that, but it's not to the point of, some of the other games that are in the pipeline that, I know are going to be published, within the next 2 to 5 years. But it could happen. I know in the older Terrible Swift Sword iteration of Great Battles in the American Civil War, there was a Rebel Sabers game
Mm-hmm.
that was cavalry specific.
Yep, it was. In fact, one of the several scenarios in it was the Gettysburg East Cavalry Field.
Right.
And you could technically mate it with Terrible Swift Sword, which is why I own it, to be honest.
Right.
But I suspect we will all be throwing our copies of that away once Three Dog comes out, the new Three Dog Deluxe or 4th edition or whatever we're calling it.
Yeah, I'm actually play testing that cavalry scenario right now.
Excellent.
Yeah, and we're having fun with it. It's pretty wild and woolly. We're finding out. We went from, kind of looking at the forces arrayed and kind of thinking, okay, all right, what are we gonna do? And before we knew it, we were having like, crazy scrums and routes and things like that where, we just weren't expecting it to be, that crazy. So
I
we'll
have
see what
recently
happens.
acquired a book on the East Cavalry Field action at Gettysburg. I know that it happened, and Custer was there. That's about it.
Right.
So I look
I remember
forward
the
to
last
experiencing it
time
in
we
a
were.
game.
Yeah, I remember the last time we were all in Gettysburg having a GBACW meetup. We were lucky enough to have a licensed Gettysburg tour guide named Phil Musket, and he took us out on day trips to various parts of the battlefield, and we actually went to the East Cavalry fields for one of the days and
That's cool.
spent like 3 or 4 hours going around all different parts of
That
it.
must
So,
have been wicked, man. That must have been
oh, it was
wicked.
great. Yeah, it was really great. And then once I saw the map for the East Cavalry fields in Three Dog Deluxe, it's kind of like, oh yeah, all right, I know where that is. Point to an area in the map. That's where we were standing, and that's where we were talking about the battlefield and looking over it.
Mm-hmm.
So, uh,
Aware of
plans to
anybody working
reprint
on that? I
Gringo?
think it
No.
sounds unlikely to me.
Yeah. Never say never, but I would think that River of Death, the Chickamauga game, would be redone first. And then after that, Red Badge of Courage, which is on two of the battles at Manassas or Bull Run, depending on how you uh, name your battles. I think both of those would probably be redone before uh, Gringo would be tackled. But I also have to say I have a real soft spot in my heart for Gringo. It's a wonderful set of games, along with the expansion for it, which is Battles with the Gringos, and it it just has a different flavor, of course, than all of the Civil War battles because it's on um, the war against Mexico in 1846 through 48. It just has that Tex-Mex flavor to it, but you can easily see that it's part of the same system,
Mm-hmm.
and the battles are just a lot of fun. The situations are different. You usually have the Mexicans who have large numbers, but they're not really great quality, so you have to mitigate that and figure out how to use a disparity in manpower, how to use it when you can't get them to do what you want them to do half of the time, and that sort of thing. It's a great package.
And
Uh, Jeff had a question
yeah,
here.
about
Yeah.
why you picked those four particular battles
Yes.
for by swords and bayonets, and other than just the fact that they are four small battles.
Right. Um, Size was the predominant factor. So, in other words, a battle had to be small enough to be able to put the battlefield on a uh, 22 by 17 map sheet. Um, the forces involved had to be small enough to where, you weren't trying to do something like, say, P Ridge, where, that was a really big battle and you could fit it on one or two maps on a tactical level, but the forces involved would be really, really big and really involved. And so that wouldn't fit. Um, as far as how it happened, um, the designer's notes in By Swords and Bayonets will kind of um, tell you the story of how the project came to be. And I'm not sure I want to ruin the story, but there wasn't there wasn't any particular rhyme or reason with how the battles were selected, but the parameters of the package kind of determined the short list, right? So, obviously we weren't going for Chickamauga, we weren't going for the Wilderness, we weren't going for Chancellorsville. Those are all way, way, way too big. So then, you have to just start scouring and looking around for, wait, was that battle small enough? If you've heard of it. A lot of them I had never really heard of until I started working on it. So I started by just, looking for names of small battles that, maybe nobody had heard of or hadn't been gamed before, and did a little, basic Wikipedia or internet research on them to figure out, are they small enough? And then if they were, I put them on kind of a list. And then for each one, I just went through and started doing a little basic research to, to learn the history of what happened, to figure out whether there's enough of a game there to make it work. And if there was, then I would just go into, basic map research, order of battle research. And for a lot of games, once you start getting into order of battle research, that is a limiter all its own. Because I got to tell you, most people rely on the official records of the Civil War, which is a encyclopedic collection of like maybe 50 or 60 different volumes, each with about 1,000 pages in each volume. I mean, it's huge.
And
And it is
what's inside? What's inside these volumes?
it
Like
is
letters.
all it is all yeah, all of the reports, all of the manpower reports used by the government, letters,
Bloody hell, man!
yeah, letters from Lincoln to McClellan and vice
Whoa,
versa,
man!
and all this stuff. And it's just everything that survived, and that's an important thing
Right, right,
because
right.
a lot of things were lost when the Union finally took over Richmond, and they basically threw anything that they thought might be really important into a bonfire before they left. And then you also find out that there are any number of battles where the commanders involved just didn't write a report, either because they were killed, or it could be because by the time they were ready to sit down and write a report on last month's battle, they're involved in another one. They don't have time. Other times, it might be because of their performance in the battle, to where, well, I just kind of don't want to talk about it, right? So, you know, even in some of the reports that do survive, you'll sometimes have to sift through them and factor in what you might know about that commander as to why, he's going out of his way to, to praise his forces when, you're looking at the history and you're like, wait, wasn't this the guy that routed off the field?
Yeah, so
You
you
know?
gotta know your history before studying the history.
There's a
Right.
great story about Napoleon that you probably are familiar with, about how he would write his reports back to the directory, and then he'd get published in the French newspapers. And he was always effusive in his praise about generals like these Austrian generals that he's fighting in 1797, but not Archduke Charles for some reason. He never says it because he wants them to keep their jobs.
Right. That's right. That's
So
right.
there are political and there's plenty of political characters in the Civil War too. There are always potential political motivations for what's going to happen when those reports get written, right?
That's right. That's right. And on a side note to that, I'm starting a little bit of basic work on perhaps bringing the 7 Days battles and the Peninsula campaign to GBACW. And in
That's
the
a shut up and take my money suggestion.
well, yeah, but it's a lot of work, and
Oh yeah.
part of the problem, with trying to figure out orders of battle and manpower estimates is knowing that both sides were wildly inaccurate with their manpower estimates and for
Hmm.
various different reasons. So from the Union side, McClellan was famously always, kvetching to Lincoln that he needed more men, even though he had probably around 102,000 by the time he got to the gates of Richmond. But, that never stopped him from supposing that the Confederates had 200,000 when they maybe only had 40 to 60, maybe.
Hmm.
And so any of the reports that you see from McClellan that actually have specific figures in it, you have to, look at it and go, well, wait a minute, why is he writing this report? Is he writing this so that he can get Lincoln to send him, another corps or another, couple thousand men? Or is he writing this to make the Confederates look like they're bigger, so he's going to, shrink the number that he's saying he's got? Who knows? And
Hmm.
then, the Confederates, they were hedging their numbers based on a number of different factors, like not wanting the Union to know they only had maybe 60,000, things like that.
Hmm.
So it's really, really difficult to figure out, manpower and then try to parse it all the way down to individual regiments.
Hmm. Particularly
That's
when you have to
really
rate
difficult.
those regiments too.
That's right. So you have to rate them based on their performance historically, based on sometimes what they would go on to do later. You know, uh, sometimes you have to, knock them back because of, historically what happened in the battle, even though that that they were better or worse than that. One case in point for the 7 days and the peninsula would be Thomas Stonewall Jackson. That in that campaign, he famously uh, probably was at the point of physical exhaustion, and at a number of very important junctures during the peninsula and the 7 days, Jackson was just checked out.
Hmm.
His body just shut down on him, and he didn't show up on the Union flank at Mechanicsburg like he was supposed to. He arrived late for Gaines's Mill, late enough that Robert E. Lee, kind of chided him as he came finally marching down the road. He said, like, "Oh, General Jackson, it's good to see you, sir. I would have expected to have seen you a few hours earlier." And then also at White Oak Swamp, right before the Battle of Glendale, they were basically pursuing McClellan's, uh, you know, supply trains and everything on the way to Malvern Hill. He was in a position to just wreak havoc with the retreating Union force, and he basically stopped um, across White Oak Swamp and did nothing. And then earlier that day, he had a personal meeting with Lee where they were like, writing plans in the dirt and everything. And nobody actually heard the conversation, but they could kind of tell what was going on. And Jackson was seen to, like draw some things in the sand and then like stomp on it and say, "We've got him. We've got him." And then he got on his horse and rode away, presumably, to dismantle the Union. And then he did nothing for the rest of the day. He just rolled up under a tree and went to sleep. So, if I get to the point where, I start working on these 7 days campaigns and I'm having to, create a Jackson counter with, all of his ratings on it, it's like it's probably not going to look like the type of Stonewall Jackson counter that you would see in Death Valley, which was, that was his real heyday. And I'm even toying with the idea that I might need 2 or 3 Jackson counters to allow the players to explore. Okay, what would have happened if we got Shenandoah Valley Jackson at the 7 days? What would have happened if Jackson was a little under the weather, but maybe no worse than your average Corps commander? And what would happen if we get,
Jackson's asleep.
physically exhausted Jackson? So maybe, that'll add to the replayability to be able to just, see what happens under 3 different types of situations.
Mhm.
And really, all of the battles in the 7 days were replete with command lapses and misunderstandings that affected not just Jackson, but Longstreet, Jackson himself, and most of the Confederate command, which would end up getting replaced after the 7 days because Lee just decided, look, I gotta rebuild this boat, but I need I need a better keel. And so people like Magruder and Holmes and Huger were kind of either sent west and resigned to some backwards theater or just drummed out of the army altogether.
And of course, Lee at this time is not the Lee of 1863, where he's already won a bunch of important battles. This is Lee having just been placed in charge after Joe Johnston gets shot at Seven Pines. So, and he's Granny Lee at this point. Everybody's making fun of him because he's been in charge of digging trenches for the whole war so far.
That's right.
So I'm exaggerating for dramatic effect here, slightly, but only slightly, right? So Lee is not the veteran commander who's built these relationships with his subordinates at this point yet either. So I find this very unsurprising. I also think that Perfidious Albion, I think this is more of a general trend than it is necessarily a trend for this particular system, because aren't we planning on seeing South Mountain and maybe some other actions in with Antietam as well?
Yes. Greg Laubach he's working really hard on his Maryland campaign box, which it'll be called Gleam of Bayonets 2, but that's actually kind of a misnomer because the original Gleam of Bayonets was solely on the Battle of Antietam. This is going to be wider in scope, and it's going to encompass the entire Maryland campaign. So South Mountain is going to be redone. And then there will be Antietam, there will be Harper's Ferry, and also Shepherdstown, which was the day after Antietam when the Union tried to, cross the river there and chase Lee away. And that didn't work out real well, but we'll see what the game looks like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We mentioned the official histories. Are those available online? I know you can buy them on DVD-ROMs, because I have some.
Yes.
But I think they're available on the internet too. Where?
Yeah,
I'm not really sure.
You can find them on the internet, and I think it's some form of the Library of Congress. But the problem is, because it's so huge, when you get into trying to find something, it's really difficult, and the online system is very slow and tedious to work with. So I would tell anyone who's really interested to actually find one of the CD-ROM versions of it. It's
they're not terribly expensive. You can get them on
30 to 50,
something like that.
most.
You could get them on Amazon.
Yes, exactly. In fact,
that's where I got them.
I have my set, and it's on. They got the whole thing on 2 CD-ROMs, which I thought was like, wow,
That's a lot of documentation.
It is. It's a lot of it, and it isn't perfect to go through either on CD-ROM. I find that I have to like go into there and kind of find the area that I'm interested in, and then save part of it as a PDF,
Mm,
which I can later go in and kind of search through a little more
take apart, yeah.
easily. Yeah,
That
yeah.
makes sense to me. John Stanley, thanks for the support. It is much appreciated. This is a good question related to the 7 days, because of
Hmm.
course Lee is running basically he doesn't establish Longstreet's core and Jackson's core at this point.
Right.
How would you be inclined, or do you have an idea for how to reflect that in the structure of the game, or is it just Lee running around and several of his division commanders are out of command at any given time? Because I think that might actually work.
Yeah. At this juncture of the war, the Confederates were actually still kind of operating with the brigade as the unit, but also they had early concepts of wings. Like Longstreet was a wing commander, which encompassed um, two or three divisions, which each had brigades under it, but they were usually used as brigades. So they would be mixing and matching brigades and kind of overriding a divisional structure, as they sent people hither and yon. So, it was definitely in flux for the Confederates, and it wouldn't really settle until, before they began the Gettysburg campaign. The Union, though, they had pretty much centralized on a core structure, and each corps usually had two divisions of three or maybe four brigades in each. And yeah, that was pretty much in effect already for the Peninsula campaign.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Another great question from Jonathan Dyer here. Not in terms of like stuff you're actually planning or working on necessarily, but off the top of your head, do you think that there could be another couple of Civil War quad type packages of similar size to Swords and Bayonets? Are there enough small battles that are fairly interesting to do that with?
I would think there probably would be. Yeah. Whether I'm the person to do them,
Well,
that I would probably say probably not, because if I do keep going with
7 days
with
will keep you busy for a little bit.
yeah, well, not only that, it's going to be the entire Peninsula campaign. So there'll
Mm-hmm.
be Williamsburg in there, maybe a couple of other battles farther southeast of the 7 days and the 7 days. So that that'll be a project that'll keep me busy for quite a while, and I wouldn't have time to wrangle up a by swords and bayonets. But that doesn't mean that somebody else couldn't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
What's a good
another
book you could recommend on the 7 days?
oh wow, lots of them, because I've been reading them like one after another for like the last couple of years. I know Stephen Sears has a good book
To the Gates
on
of
it.
Richmond. That
Yeah,
that
To the
was going to
Gates
be
of
my
Richmond.
suggestion because it's the
Yes,
only book on the subject I have.
yes. I have that. There's The 7 Days by Clifford Doughty. It was written like way back in 1979, I think. That one's good. I have a couple of them that are on specific parts of the 7 days that I'm pouring through, and I can't call the titles or the authors of them because they're not the usual ones that I usually see, when I'm researching a major battle or a campaign. But yeah, the 7 days is pretty well covered. Yeah,
Hmm.
there's a lot of stuff out there on it.
And game wise, of course, if you want to see, Worthington just did a Civil War Brigade Battle Series game on the seven
Hmm.
days.
Right.
which is a much, much simpler system, of course.
Yeah.
And then, of course, at the operational level, last year, right about this time, actually, I think this was last year, we did On to Richmond, which is the GCACW Peninsula campaign. And we had a lot of fun with that.
That one's on my shelf.
It got real hairy after a while.
Did it?
We were about 2/3 of the way into it. We got about 3/4 of the way into it in a week. It slowed down considerably toward the end when it was a lot of people stuck in bad positions and trying to make something out of that. And there's more forces on the map at the time too, of course. So it slowed way down. But we were playing like 20 turns a day early on.
Wow.
So
wow.
Yeah, and of course Jeff Baylor is correct here. Lee in West Virginia was not a winner.
No.
So I know this is
go ahead. One thing right before you go into that is that even though Lee was new to commanding the newly rechristened Army of Northern Virginia during the 7 days, you could still see early traces of the same sorts of command issues that would come back to bite him at Gettysburg and the Overland Campaign. And by that I mean his penchant for being polite to a fault, not wanting to, show up or rebuke his commanders, certainly not in public, and his penchant for trying to impart what he wanted to do, but leaving the details to his subordinates, which usually wasn't a good idea because they didn't have his panache. They didn't have his leadership skills to apply farther on down the line. And so, that's how you end up with the situation at Gettysburg where,
this happened multiple times at Gettysburg.
Yes.
This happened at AP Hill Longstreet Annual. It happens with Harry Heath at the beginning, and there's even a great scene illustrating that in the movie. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie where he's kind of dressing Heath down, and Heath is just not picking up on that at all.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, that is why we have orders, So, yeah, he definitely had a penchant for doing that. So, yeah.
Mr. David Thompson, thanks for stopping by. Hopefully we'll see you at Buckeye Game Fest in a couple of months, by the way. We'll have to have a chat about that. So I do know, Alan, to get away from GBACW in our last 5 minutes or so, I know that another of your favorites is the legendary Central Front series from SPI. Would you think about designing a new game using that system on whatever topic?
Ooh, no. And the reason why I would be really loath to jump into something like that is just through ignorance of the subject. So now somebody who I would like to see take a shot at it is Dick Vollers. And he was one of the small group of people who kind of kept developing the Central Front series even after Alan Camps had started to change the system for whoever was running S&T at the time. And Dick was one of the two major developers of the consolidated Central Front series, where they updated the orders of battle with information that was not available in 1979, and then they worked to bring the system together, tighten it up, so that you could actually put all 5 of them on one map. Then they got Kerry Anderson to create a counter set so that all of the forces would have something close to the original SPI design. And then they kind of held court over on Constant World, and the rest of the community kind of rallied, and they kept it going. So I do know that somebody had started working on maps to extend the maps into Denmark and Sweden and stuff like that, but I don't think they got much further than maps. And other issues with just the sizes of the forces that would be employed up there came out, and so they kind of ran into a brick wall. But yeah, I don't know enough about the modern forces in the late 20th century to to even be able to pick up a pen and start on that.
Do you feel like that system could be ported over to World War II?
Again, I don't know enough about the logical underpinnings of the friction point system.
Fair.
The idea that you have a unit that has a certain number of friction points, and until they hit that point where the unit basically dissolves, they operate at quote unquote full strength. There are no step losses. I don't know how much of that just has to do with modern technology, better tanks, better logistics systems, all of those sort of things. And so it wouldn't really be valid to port that system back into World War II or an earlier era. I don't know whether that's true or false. So, again, I certainly wouldn't.
I think that's
see
a completely
myself doing that.
reasonable answer, by the way. It is I don't know is always okay. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. You find yourself saying that a lot, even when you're designing something that you do know a fair bit about. You always find there's something that you don't know. And that's that's part of the process of designing and figuring things out. You might put together something like that and you think you have a good order of battle, you have accurate terrain and everything like that, and you're trying to apply the history, and then you start play testing it and you find out, wait a minute, this doesn't work for for whatever reason. It's like you can't get the historical result from this game the way it is now, or something like that. So now you've got to figure out, okay, how do I create that? How do I handicap it?
So, circling back then to By Swords and Bayonets, we do think that this is at the printer now, and I think it's going to be the next thing. It goes on a shipping container.
I think it is actually on a shipping container now, I think.
Oh, so that's even better. I'm going to throw a link to the pre-order page for anybody, because we're right up against a deadline here. So if you want to get the pre-order price, which, as Alan said, is a scandalously cheap, like $38, plus shipping, of course, which is another 20, but still less than $50 shipped for 4 games in one. Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah.
So if anybody wants to hop on that, feel free. I threw a link in the chat. After that, I think Three Dog Deluxe is going to be probably the next one we actually see, right?
It's a race between that and Stepping into Hell, which is Albert Smith's 4-mapper on the Wilderness. And
Wilderness is the next ILAO, apparently.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I've been working with Albert on that, and also Dick Vollers, who I mentioned as one of the players in Central Front. Dick Vollers is the developer on Stepping into Hell, and I have had nothing but great fun with that. We've played it at some of our get-togethers for the last couple of years, and yeah, it's fantastic. He has a number of new concepts that he's gonna put in there, like drifting units getting lost in the woods, and
which happened.
90% of the map is woods. There are fires that can crop up, and yeah, there's all kinds of really, really interesting stuff in
Mhm.
there. And it really comes out in the playtesting. We were playing one of the scenarios for the second day, the 6th of May, and I was one of the Union players, and we were trying to have at the Confederates, and I just found that it was just impossible to keep your forces together. Like one brigade next to another brigade next to another brigade with the division commander like on a road centrally or something like. It's like, yeah, okay, you could look at the map and go, okay, that's how I want to do it. But once you started moving units through through the woods and to establish contact, you'd start drifting. So before you know it, you've got like half a brigade over here, of a brigade over here, and an entire division in the middle of them, which are keeping you from, maintaining a coherent force and, getting that,
Mhm.
that force that's necessary to actually drive the rebels back. Oh yeah, by the way, yeah, there are rebels in their woods, and so yeah, it was very, very, very frustrating, but it's a fun kind of frustration.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, folks, we are out of time. In fact, we're a couple minutes over, but I screwed up the intro, so I will take the heat for this one and not blame Dan, which is what I would usually do. Alan, thanks so much for doing this with us. We'd love to have you back
Thanks,
on
Alan.
at some point. Plus, eventually, we might have you back on just to yap about just GBACW in general, because that's always good.
Yeah.
So thanks so much. Everybody have a great rest of the night. We'll see you all again next Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we won't be up against the Super Bowl, which I notice a lot of people have stopped watching.